All right. Welcome, everyone. This is our weekly Summer in Our Own Voice Showcase series, our second presentation of the series. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Just as a reminder, I am going to be keeping everybody muted except during the designated question and answer times. There will be several periods, several question and answer periods during the presentation where we would love to hear from our audience members and ask for in terms of experiences and questions that you may have. For those of you who are following along on Facebook, please feel free to comment on the stream with any questions that you have. Those will be relayed to us and we'll be able to ask them to the presenters. So I'm gonna just go over a couple of logistical things and then I'm gonna turn it over to our presenters. If you have, so like I said, I'm gonna keep everyone muted except during the designated question and answer times. Do feel free to put questions in the chat. If you think of something and you don't wanna forget it, just go ahead and put the question in the chat and we'll get to it during the Q&A. There will be 3 Q&A sessions, sections of the presentation, so you will get multiple chances to ask. You can find the chat box at the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop or computer, or on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you're on a smartphone. If you have questions and you're not able to access any of these functions, but you have questions after the event, you can email me at ckiley, C-K-I-E-L-Y, at naminyc.org after the presentation. And again, if you are on Facebook, feel free to comment with your questions or comments. This presentation is hosted by NAMI NYC, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City, which offers support, education, and advocacy for individuals and families impacted by mental illness. I want to emphasize during this time, we are offering remote support groups via Zoom. So you can join the video chat, you can call in, you don't have to use video chat if you don't want to. And those are all listed on our website at naminyc.org/calendar. We have almost 30 support groups that meet at least once a month, both for people dealing with their own mental health issues or who are trying to support family and friends. You can also find out about our services by calling our helpline, 212-684-3264. I'm gonna put that in the chat when I'm done so that people can have it for reference. But we are really trying to make sure that in this time of a lot of chaos and upheaval, that people are getting the support that they need, even if it is remotely or over the phone or over video chat. So just as a reminder for folks in the Zoom chat, this presentation is being recorded and live streamed to Facebook. So if you want to share it with a friend after the fact, you can go to our Facebook page, NAMI NYC, and look under our videos tab, and you will see the recording of this presentation on that screen. I think that is it for our introduction. So I am going to turn it over to Juliet and Sonja, who are going to be our own voice presenters this evening. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Hi, I'm Juliet, and I live in Brooklyn with my husband and my cat. And my husband and I always say that the cat is the sane one in the family. First and foremost, I'm an artist. I've been doing that my entire life. I never thought of it as a discovery. It was just something that I always did. Right now, I'm working in fiber. You can see my studio. That's my yarn tree and my loom over there. I weave tapestries and then sew them into sculptures. At the end of the day, I like to cook. It helps me decompress. When I first met my husband, I don't think he knew what a vegetable was. So I worked really hard to teach him the merits of a salad. And now he actually will eat vegetables on a regular basis, which I consider to be a great attribute to my cooking skills. A small thing about me that's weird is I have won a limbo contest. So I'll be talking about other things than that. And I'm an artist currently living with bipolar disorder. So Sonja.
All right, thank you, Juliet. Hi everyone, my name's Sonja. So I'm originally from Australia, so shout out to my country back behind me there with the kangaroos. I have lived in New York for 12 years and I love it here. I love that everyone's they're straightforward, they say what they think and they think what they say, which I really appreciate. Whereas Australians tend to be a little bit more polite to your face and say what they really think behind your back kind of people. And I'm more straightforward and people did not appreciate that very much. But since I've been in New York, it's been a lot easier to be me, which turned out to be a lot easier in general. I love the summertime. It's my favorite time of year. And I really, really want to learn how to surf one day. I feel like as an Australian, I'm obligated to do so. So we'll see how that goes. So the presentation is set out in 3 sections. It's what happened, what helps, and what's next. Juliet will share her story and then I'll share mine. And then we'll go to you guys if you have any questions for us or anything you'd like to share. Or you can write it in the chat and Clara can then convey questions and stories to us, which works really well. Yeah, so we'll get started with Juliet and what happens.
Okay, so I don't know who has a normal version of this story of what happens. I had a very ordinary suburban upbringing, really quiet town. I did well in school. I had a few close friends. I was doing my art. I graduated from high school. Everything's growing up Brady. And my parents decided to treat me to a vacation in Mexico for a graduation present. So I was so excited. We got there and I decided I wanted to be best friends with everyone at the resort. My plan was to meet and become best friends with all of them. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I was drinking, I was fooling around with everybody. I was doing everything crazy. I got back. Oh, and I was happier than I'd ever been in my entire life. I was like, this is finally, I'm happy. And then I got back home and a friend of mine from high school said, you're not happy, you're manic. And I said to him, you never knew me. This is who I really am. I was totally suppressed in high school, that I'm not manic. I'll go to a psychiatrist and prove you wrong. So I went to a psychiatrist and of course the psychiatrist said, you're not happy, you're manic. And so of course I said, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know me. This is who I am. I went off to college and in 4 days, I thought I could tell the future. And I ended up in a psychiatric hospital. So I went from being happier than I'd ever been in my entire life to being drugged out of my mind in a psychiatric hospital. So for the next 25 years, I had pretty extreme mood swings. So for my depressions, I would, have a horrible time getting out of bed because not only was I weak, but emotionally I didn't want to face the day. Just the idea of having to be awake for another hour was so painful. I would cry all the time until I had dry heaves. And then I would have to knock myself out with antipsychotics. I'd sleep, I'd wake up, I'd cry. And that would just go on all day. And it was like a heavy blanket. I'm sure you all know that depression is something physically debilitating and makes you feel so bad. I did not respond to antidepressants very well. So I actually had electroconvulsive therapy about 45 times. Every time I had a massive depression episode, I would get about 6 treatments of ECT. I'd be crying, they'd knock me out. I'd wake up with a super bad headache, but extraordinarily feeling better than when I was first knocked out. And I did have some memory loss, but honestly, I felt so bad. I had no desire to remember that point in my life. My manias were different. You know, super angry, super agitated. I was so mean to everyone. I was sticking pins in my fingers. I was racing around. I was breaking glass. And again, it was just, you know, it was another example of race around, take antipsychotics and race around again. The worst though for me was the ultra rapid cycling, which is when those would go back and forth, as I'm sure you know, you're depressed, you knock yourself out, you wake up, you're manic, and that would rapidly cycle throughout the day. I've been hospitalized 4 times, twice for depression and twice for mania. For me, it was actually quite comforting to be in the hospital, because then I didn't have to make decisions about my life. I didn't have to wonder, was I going to have breakfast? Was I going to have lunch? All those things were taken care of. So it really helped me ground myself. It was actually a little bit scarier to get out, because I had to go back to my normal life and I didn't know what normal was. Sonja?
Okay, thank you. So what happened to me, I was born into an abusive family.
Sonja?
My father.
Sorry, can you bring the speaker up? It's a little.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. Sorry about that, everyone. So I'll start again. I was born into an abusive family. I'm the middle of 3 girls, and my father was physically abusive, but he also was the child of abuse, and I feel like he grew up in a time when it was, I don't think it was ever acceptable, but people just, it was what happened, and no one said anything or did anything. And so I think to him, he normalized it, and then he just passed that on. And my older sister and younger sister weren't beaten, but it was just me for some reason, and I have theories on why that is. But it was a very, very scary way to grow up, because I never knew when it was going to happen. I could be quietly playing by myself one moment, and the next moment I'm being, knocked to the ground and kicked, and I have no idea why. So I spent a lot of my time hiding in my house, and then or down the street in the park somewhere, or in drain pipes. I just basically hid because I was terrified of going home. When after a beating would happen, my mum would just continue on with their day as though it was nothing. And it was, no one was helping me, no one was standing up for me, and it was very scary. And then, that's how I learned how to form relationships. So at school, I was bullied quite severely, basically from the moment I started school all the way to graduating from high school, because I didn't know how to relate to people in any other way. I knew it wasn't healthy, I just didn't know what else to do. And I also didn't know why it was happening. But my way of dealing with it when I was growing up was to be a bit of a high achiever. And I was also very athletic, so I would compete in every event I could compete in. I played sports, I did all this stuff, and I won trophies and I won ribbons, so I could look at them and say, look, I'm not what everyone seems to think I am. I'm not this worthless loser that people seem to think. I actually am good at things, and that was a way of helping me to get through things. And I would set goals and achieve them, and that made me feel good, and all this sort of stuff that was really good to help me get through everything. But as I got older, what it sort of became was that I was actually effectively not dealing with anything, because I was too busy going forward that I forgot to actually deal with what was happening. And so it kind of started to come out in my life as I hit my 20s. And by the time I was in my 30s, things went horribly wrong. I completely broke, and I started doing dangerous things because I didn't care about myself anymore. And I ended up one day, I was living at my parents' house because I was saving money to come here. And I don't remember what was happening at the time, but I wasn't doing well. And so I decided to drive my car. And I went and parked in a parking lot. And I decided, I was listening to music because I thought that would help me feel better. But it didn't really do anything. So I texted a couple of people to say hello, anything really. and they didn't respond. I waited for about 3 hours and nobody responded. And it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I blacked out and I shut down, and I don't remember anything after that. But I drove to a liquor store and I bought a bottle of vodka. I drove back to my parents' house, went inside, argued with my mother. I got orange juice for my vodka and off I went in my car. And I don't remember doing any of it. And the next thing I do remember, I come back to life again, and I'm in jail because I've been in a car accident. But I asked my mum years later, because she saw me, she knew I wasn't okay. And I asked her why she didn't help me. You know, she could have gotten in my car with me. She could have gotten in her own car to follow me. She could have at least called me on my phone at some time during the night to see if I was okay. And she didn't do any of those things because she was more worried about herself, you know, because she got upset by our argument. And I just thought that, to me, that was the worst thing that actually happened. That was worse than the accident that happened that night. So that's a little bit about me. What, do you guys have any questions at all for us? As I said earlier, you can put them in the chat, or you can, I guess, raise your hand and be unmuted and ask the question, whatever makes you comfortable. Or you can share if you like. Yeah.
Does anyone want to talk about how their situation started?
Or if you know anyone and you need to, you know, ask any questions about how to help somebody, you know. I can say that, you know, growing up in an abusive environment is a very difficult way to go. I ultimately was diagnosed with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. I'd been diagnosed with bipolar and anxiety and depression and all that, which was very true. But to me, it was like, well, how was I supposed to come out of the situation that I grew up in? I think I ended up the way I was going to end up. Like, if I ended up in any other way, it would have been strange if I was healthy from that. So I didn't accept those as being like diagnoses to say, oh, that makes you sick, because I thought I just came out exactly how I was supposed to. And then eventually I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I went, that makes sense to me. I can understand that. I agree with that. And so that's the one that I'll stick with.
Yeah. Looks like Martha's unmuted yourself if you wanted to ask something.
Okay. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to tell you that I've been diagnosed with complex trauma. And just a few years ago, it was just PTSD. And before that, it was depression and anxiety. I also have ADHD. But to go back to the beginning, when I was a little girl and everybody, you know, I was just a little kid, and suddenly my mother comes running at me, screaming that she's going to kill me. And I don't even recognize who she is. Where's my mother? So anyway, I just barely didn't die because she strangled me. Now, things like this went on throughout childhood, and I stayed out of the house as much as possible. But my father said I have to stay close to my mother because she might burn the house down because she made fires. So I was really stuck in that way. The thing is that nobody goes to a psychiatrist. Nobody admits to a mental illness. When I graduated high school, then my father said, we'll take her to a psychiatrist. So the three of us went in, and within 5 minutes, the doctor said that she suffers from schizophrenia. So all these years, my mother had schizophrenia worse and worse. Anyway, she got great on her medication. She was a beautiful person. We got along great for a while. Anyway, I believed that if you have a problem, you got to reach out and get help. And if that therapist or doctor or clinician, whatever, doesn't help, then go on to something else. So been through a lot of therapy because I didn't know what was wrong with me. And like I said, after a long time, discovered, this is severe depression and anxiety, panic attacks, agoraphobia. And then when I was 45, the ADHD. So by the time I got onto that kind of medication, I had, just so much failure. Anyway, so complex trauma is not really, I don't know if it's accepted or whatever. I've been in a lot of therapy, CBT, a lot of treatment. I've been taking medications because, again, you got to get help. It's not acceptable to be not well if you can do something about it. So I'm getting excellent care now from a trauma specialist. And it's very hard for me to talk about this with anybody, only therapists and close family. But thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for sharing. That was really wonderful.
I know that sounds so painful. I'm so sorry, but I think I know getting help is a huge step.
Yeah.
I find doing this is really helpful for me. When I started doing the inner own voice through NAMI, it's like the best thing that I ever did. It's like, for me, it's a mix of therapy and socializing, because I get to meet like the most interesting people doing it. And just since I've been able to talk about it through this platform, I've actually gotten a lot better at talking about it. I can speak more clearly and more concisely, and it actually has not only helped me how to say things better, it's also helped with my mind and cleared my head up in the way I think and see things is a lot better now, just through talking about it to people 6 times a month. It's made a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree. Being able to taking like something in my head and figuring out how to verbalize it helps me sort of figure out not necessarily the answer, but a direction to go in to get there. And in a way, it is a form of therapy, and it's sort of for me, and it helps me sort of figure out. I'm sorry, my cat is meowing. I'm sorry. Like I said, the cat's the sane one. So, but yeah, I think even just getting yourself into a program for me was like made a huge difference.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can see, looks like Wasi has their hand up.
So should I click on it?
Yeah. Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. In my case, I was raised in a very a broken home. First, my father died when I was a toddler, and my mother was depressed as a result. And it was a very, very sad environment, and was raised by a very rageaholic uncle, very violent, a lot of physical abuse, and a lot of traumatic experience. And as a result, the bullies, being bullied, I didn't have that much childhood. Mostly I lived in isolation, fear of being abused. I was just, watching from the side, most of the time working. Even when I am allowed to play, I was not a participant because of the fear, not having an older brother or a father to protect me, or a mother. So it was a very traumatic upbringing. I'm glad I survived. Most children don't survive. If it's not the abuse, it's the childhood disease, and the malnutrition, all kind of, illnesses at that time, in our time. And then, the post-traumatic, stress, the civil war, seeing people being killed, being cold, and seeing people, hanged, shot, in mass murder, to terrorize people, living in constant fear of being killed, then running to save my life. It's just, constant terror, and then becoming a refugee. Still, there's gratitude. Still, I saved my life. I ran, choosing to be killed running instead of being caught and tortured and die. But by God's grace, I was saved. I managed to run to the neighboring country, became a refugee, went through, the hardships there as a refugee, but still grateful for being alive. And then came to the United States, went through the culture shock, the adjustment, and then, depression. And I started medicating with alcohol. And then alcohol not only become, as a means to self-medicate, I became dependent on it and drinking more of it. And then became a parent, and then I became a single parent, raising my daughter by myself, and a teenage crisis going as a single parent, lot of problems. And then I got help with, professional help, and the social worker that was helping us, she sent me to a fellowship that's saying I need help, not only my daughter. And after she closed, our family file, my daughter turned 18, and she say, I need help because of the, the trauma, all this problem I had from my upbringing all the way to the present time. I need help, and I have, people who are like me, who can understand me, who can help me. So she sent me to a fellowship called Al-Anon, a 12-step program. So I went to Al-Anon in 2005, and believe me, it was a godsend. And I called the lady Monica my living saint, because I met there people I never had growing up, like lost aunts, lost sisters, brothers, who are very understanding, very loving and caring. And they helped me to save my life. And I got help with the depression, psychiatric care for 3, not hospitalized, but, talk therapy, 3 years medication. And then from Al-Anon, I got another fellowship, to help me with alcohol. And I, now I'm sober, I'm freed from that alcohol addiction. And I'm married now. And I never thought this would be possible, but because of getting help from 2 fellowships, Al-Anon and AA, I'm putting my life together, and now my daughter is living a great life, and I'm living a good life. And even, I survived brain aneurysm. The program helped me to save my life. And still I struggle, from depression here and there. and other traumatic, betrayals, processing things from workplace and other. But I have the tools from the fellowship that's helping me to share, to process, and get through life problems. So I'm very grateful. So help is really essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's extraordinary.
Wow, yeah. It's interesting when people have experiences that, most people never would ever imagine, having to go through, and to be able to go through something like that and be here and talking to us, it's just, it's amazing. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yes, it's such strength. And I think it sort of shows, what Martha was saying about when you start, I'm sorry. When you
can participate too.
Yes, she says, good job. No, okay. So, no, just to be able to reach out and you having the strength to look for the different resources is that's a great step forward.
Yeah. We should move on to the next section of what helps. So over to you, Juliet.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
So as I was saying, for about 25 years, I didn't respond to any medication, and I was doing, a little bit of therapy and ACT. And then about 9 years ago, I started to feel good, and I thought I was manic. But this time, my doctor said, no, you're not manic, you're actually happy. But I hadn't been happy in so long that I had sort of forgotten what being happy felt like. I mean, getting this medication for me was like night and day. It was like a release that I hadn't had. And, there are side effects, as there are with many psychiatric medications. But really, when I would weigh the good versus the bad, just feeling sane, again, whatever sane means, but feeling balanced was a huge deal. I do talk therapy with my psychopharmacologist. He's actually both my medical doctor and my therapist. We found for us that's the best equation. In years past, I had done therapy with a therapist as well as a doctor, but now this seems to be the right combination. We talk about bipolar things, like accepting that bipolar is not a weakness, that bipolar is not something I did wrong, it's not my fault. We talk about random things like restaurants and movies, but it's really not what we talk about, it's how we talk about it. So, for example, if I'm talking about a restaurant I love, but I sound really down, then we sort of re-examine, like, where is my mood and how do we need to deal with this? And he always tells me I should never play poker because my face reveals everything I'm feeling. I have a pretty strict routine. I wake up at the same time, I have breakfast, I read for 20 minutes, I do some exercises, I work on my weaving in the afternoon after working after lunch, I work out at the gym, now I'm working out at home. And then, as I said, I make dinner, but it's a very structured day. And I like that because it doesn't leave me halting, wondering, all right, it's 4 o'clock, what do I do? And it's not that I never digress, but it's nice to have sort of a general structure to the day. With regard to exercise, my doctor said to me, if he could prescribe one pill, one thing, it would be exercise, not the antidepressants, not the antipsychotics. If it's just one, it would be the exercise, because he feels that does the most. And I find it too. It's incredibly grounding and at the same time energizing. Making art, clearly that like shoots off endorphins in me like nothing else. I love making art. It's a great way for me to process things. Healthy relationships with my friends and my family. I didn't always have a group of friends, and it was very hard, and I sort of secluded myself. And my grandmother said to me at one point, you know, you need friends more than they need you. And she really put to my heart that you have to go out there to make friends. I think like I sort of thought you just had friends, like who works on having friends? You just have friends. But then I sort of re-examined it and like, all right, I've got to get out there and I've got to ask them to go to the movies with me. And I've got to, and so I slowly put together a group of friends. And once, this is sort of a side thing, a friend of mine said, you know, I listen to you all the time. I have things going on in my life too. You have to ask me how I'm doing. Friends is a two-way street. That was by far the best advice she ever gave me. And it really reprogrammed me to always say, how are you doing? What do you know? And not just about me. So there's a phrase that me and my husband use. It's, oh my God, there are not enough carrots. So I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and have a panic attack. And usually the panic attacks are not about really logical things. You know, I woke up once in the middle of the night, freaked out that we didn't have the blueprints for the apartment. And I was so worried, we don't have the blueprints. Oh my God, what are we gonna, and my husband said, oh my God, there are not enough carrots. Because it's so obscure and ridiculous that it's like that trigger that I realize when I hear there are not enough carrots that I sound as illogical as that sentence is. So it's become our like code word for don't freak out. So it allows me to go back to sleep knowing that there are not enough carrots and it'll be just fine. So,
and it's fun.
Yeah. Well, once I had a panic attack and I was coming home and I called him because I was really freaked out. So when I opened the door, he was standing there with a carrot and a hammer. All right.
Okay. So for me, what helped? So when I arrived in New York, 5 years after I arrived here, I ended up in that same place again that I was in Australia when I had my car accident. Because fun fact, you can't run away from your problems because they come with you, and then you recreate them wherever you are, and it's so good. So I found myself, I'd done that 5 years after I arrived. And I was in an even more dangerous position where literally one more step and that would be the last thing I ever do. And so I pulled myself back and I had to give myself a very stern talking to and be brutally honest with myself and sort of realize that, you know, I'm the problem now. You know, I can stand around pointing at my family for the rest of my life and say, you are the problem, you started this, it's your fault, which is true, but I'm continuing it. I'm way better at it than they ever were because I know me very well and I know what hurts me and I'm really good at doing it without even thinking about it. And so I had to take responsibility for that. I had to start to, you know, be quite brutal with myself. You know, it's your own fault. You know, you're hurting yourself. And at first I was like, why am I doing this? This is horrible. Like, this does not feel good. I thought the point was going to feel good, but you can't feel good until you sort of, you know, live in reality and be very real and very honest. And I really did it because I was out of control. Like I was doing very dangerous things. I didn't care if I lived or died, and that's how I was. So I had to be very brutally honest with myself, and I had to do that to take responsibility for myself again so I could be in control of myself again, which took a good solid, I think, 3 years of being very firm and very stern with myself. It was kind of like having a drill sergeant in my head. Anytime I started to go down that road in my thoughts where I was going to do something stupid or call myself something horrible, anything that sounded remotely like it wasn't going to go well, I had to be very honest about that. And then I'd yell at myself in my head. And I'd say things like, you know, everyone says you're stupid, but you're not stupid. But you know what stupid is going down this road again because you know what's going to happen to you. And I'd have these arguments with myself. And I would think if people could hear what's going on in my head right now, they would think I was crazy, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. And that would make me laugh at myself and I'd feel better and off I'd go. But I had to do that multiple times a day for a few years before it really started to change anything or do anything. And you know, after a while, I'm developing new routines, I'm developing new patterns, new ways of thinking, and I'm actually helping myself instead of hurting myself, which that sort of stuff also, although not as prominent in my mind, that started to show as time went on. And because of that, it actually gave me perspective. And I find perspective is one of the greatest things that I've ever had. But when you're in something and you are something, I knew I wasn't well, but that wasn't enough. Knowing I'm not well isn't enough. I needed to know how to be something else. And without perspective, I don't know what something else is. I can see other people doing it and think I want to do that, but if I'm not that, then I don't know what that is. And that's not something you can just jump into and suddenly happen. You know, it's for me anyway, it was something that took a lot of time and very, very slow and almost painful and sometimes very, very boring process to get perspective. And it's been really a great way of doing it. And as I said earlier, doing your own voice, talking to people like yourselves, best therapy ever, really helps me to become much better, much more sophisticated at speaking about my problems. And along the way, I've found some really lovely people like Clara here. This is the lovely coordinator of this session. She's a great person to talk to, and I'm very lucky to have met her because it's hard to find people to do that with. And I have also a couple of other people that I can do that, which is great. And I actually like me, you know, now. So that started in 2013, that's 7 years ago. And it's actually fun being me these days. It's a lot lighter, a lot easier. I'm not carrying around other people's problems who gave them to me when I was a little kid and I never asked for them in the first place. I've got, you know, shed those, and it's still a process. I had recently, because of this isolation and having more time on my hands than I expected to have, it turns out this very serious problem, very traumatic thing that happened in my early 20s, decided that now is the time that it's going to jump into the forefront of my mind, and I now have to deal with it. It was something that was so horrible that I couldn't process it. I couldn't even accept it, that it happened. And now my brain has decided that it's time to deal with that. And it's been messy, I won't lie. It got very messy. I believe in speaking directly to the people who are involved rather than some other person. So I did that, and that went very well. And by very well, I mean horribly. But for me, though, although it hasn't gone well yet, which has only been like 2 weeks, so I'll give myself a chance. I also do have healthy strategies and techniques in place already that I've been doing for a long time. So I have those in my back pocket and ready to go. And as I said, I've got people like Clara and another friend and a couple of other people who I can talk to. I've started going for walks twice a week for the last 3 weeks with a friend over the phone, our virtual walk. Just doing things like that actually really help a lot. It's exercise and it feels good. So I'm hoping that I'm kind of half waiting for the inevitable crash and burn that comes sometimes with these things, but also at the same time actively trying to not do that, but then telling myself it's okay if that does happen. All of these little balancing acts in my head at the moment, but so far so good, but we'll see how we go. So that's a bit about what helps. So do you guys have anything you'd like to share about things that help you, or any questions at all for Juliet or myself? Feel free.
Hi, yes, my name is Matt, and I do have a question, I guess mostly for Juliet, just because my brother's experience with mental illness seems most similar with Juliet. My brother has also had a few challenging transitions home from a few stays at some psychiatric hospitals. And I guess I was just curious, in your experience, is there anything that really helped you in terms of how your family or friends or just really close people in your life really helped you with that transition in terms of support and just being there for you? And any other, maybe in hindsight, anything that maybe you wish you got a little bit more from your loved ones?
Oh, that's a great question, because it's a hard transition. I sort of talked about this earlier, but it's a hard transition when you're in the hospital and they're telling you, all right, you're going to wake up at 9, and then at 9:30 you're going to have breakfast, and then you're going to go group therapy at 11, and that, and your whole day, you don't have to make a lot of decisions, and you're not in the state of mind. I'm not in the state of mind to make a lot of decisions. So I sort of had to, when I left, all of a sudden, even though I had learned all these tools, I needed something from the outside as well. And so one thing that my sister did, she is in California, and I was in Manhattan, and she called me every day at the same time. So I knew if I could make it until 10, and she would call and say, hey, are you awake? How's it going? Are you going to be okay? And it wasn't a long conversation. I mean, it could be a long conversation, but it was just someone checking in to be like, hey, just seeing how you're doing. And that made me not feel so alone, and it gave me something to sort of like grasp onto. So that really helped. I had other similar things with my parents. One of my parents, after a certain hospitalization, they would switch off having lunch with me, and they were incredibly loving and incredibly caring. But at the same time, even though it wouldn't be necessarily having lunch with me, but just knowing that at that time someone was going to check in, that they were there for me, was a huge help. It was a huge help. And that if they were available, they might try to help me go for a walk. And when I would first be out, I could go for a walk for 2 minutes, and then the next day I'd go for a shorter, a longer walk. But I think really the biggest thing for me was just some sort of regular check-in, no matter how short it was. That was probably the most helpful.
I would like to add to that too, coming from someone who didn't have those things, what I desperately wanted to have and didn't have, and it made a huge impact on my life not having it. I think it would have been a major difference if I did. All I wanted was for someone to care, someone just to say hello, that I didn't have to say hello first. They said hello to me first, just somebody. And I wasn't looking for anyone to fix anything, just someone to just listen and that I knew was there for me and actually cared. In fact, if someone tried to fix me, I wouldn't appreciate it at all. And it would actually make me angry. So yeah, what Juliet said, just knowing that somebody is thinking of you at some particular time of the day, that would have felt great.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think someone is going to feel bad if you tell them you love them again. That always, like, if you're getting, and it's very common. I mean, I think Sonja and I've talked about this. You don't usually have a really great self-esteem after getting out of the hospital for a psychiatric illness. Like, you're not leaving there, feeling like the top of the world. I'm a diagnosed bipolar person. Victory. So, I letting someone know that you care, it sounds so cliche, but it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's great.
I want to make a plug. I know we're a little short on time, but I do want to say really quickly that this is where Family to Family and some of the family member support groups can be really helpful as well. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we should move on to the last section of what's next, because we have only, I think, 8 minutes.
All right, I'll be quick.
Okay.
All right, quickly. I was born to an overachieving family, as you probably guessed. So I went to college, I went to grad school, I taught art school for a long time and worked during the internet boom to create websites. I did ceramics for a while after that in Singapore with a really intense, like the Karate Kid of ceramics. You know, he made me make 100 little cups exactly the same and then made me do it again. And now I work in fiber. I love weaving. I love sculpting. Bringing those two together is a huge boost. I make what I call satiric memoirs, where I take an event in my life and then I sort of make a humorous representation of that out of fabric. And there's like an underlying message. So the last show I had was called "You Don't Look Crazy." And it was a bunch of pieces about what it feels like to be bipolar. And they're like funny when you look at them, but then you look again and you realize, oh my God, this is not funny. So having shows is great and selling stuff is great. But for me, I had to really re-examine why I was doing art and what it does for me. Recognition is great, but connection is better. When I have a show, if I connect with one person, it's